The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are not those of New Zambia or its employees, but of the presenter and the respective guests. The New Zambia podcast is powered and proudly brought to you by New Zambia Media.
Welcome to another episode of the New Zambia podcast. I'm your host, Mutepa. Today, I wanted to touch on a topic that's pretty close to us. We see it every day on our streets, but it's become so common that we literally ignore it. And this is the topic of street children. Zambia, currently, at a conservative level, we're looking at probably 75,000 children living on our streets today, countrywide. And these are children aged between 0 to 18. We have newborns living on our streets. It's a tragedy. This problem is not new. It has been with us since post-colonial times. It has been with us since post-colonial times. I think the problem came along with urbanization and the migration from rural to urban areas, with people coming into the copper belt looking for jobs, into Lusaka looking for work. Previous systems have tried to deal with this problem. UNIP, for one, UNIP tried to work on it through its policies, though it never targeted the problem directly. I think UNIP tried to deal with it holistically through its humanism policies and its back to the land policy, trying to get families to go back to rural areas and settle there and have a more fulfilling life in rural areas. But that was the efforts that the UNIP made were sort of negated with the outbreak of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, which came to our borders in the 80s, but really exploded the late 80s, early 90s to mid 90s. With, at its peak, I think we had people aged between 18 and 45, with the prevalence rate of about 25 to 35% in some places. And this figure, because AIDS had no vaccine, this figure was a death sentence. And so we were losing people every day. 1825, think about it. Households losing mothers, fathers at the same time, uncles, aunties at the same time. And these are people who were meant to take care of the family. Zambia had a culture, and still has a culture, of it takes a village to raise a child. But on top of that culture, we had very strong extended family system, and we would take care of our own. But I think the burden of the tragedy that was the epidemic of HIV/AIDS on Zambian society made it so difficult for extended families to bring in small children. That, coupled with, you have to remember that in the 1990s, we had just switched from one-party democracy to multi-party democracy, and we switched from UNIP to MMD. MMD came in with free market economic policies and trying to unburden Zambia's debt by forcing the structural adjustment program through forcing privatization through the structural adjustment program. And this led to a lot of job losses, and a lot of people were hurting economically. And you layer on top of that families having to take on extended family members, just the burden. You can imagine the burden of an extra 2 or 3 kids you have to feed, you have to clothe, you have to take to school. This in urban areas and especially in peri-urban areas where it hit the hardest became a disaster. And this is the disaster that we see today. So I think that's a bit of the history of where we're coming from and trying to get an understanding of how sort of we got here. So I think those are the few factors that I would say led to the current position that we're in. So now, when I talk, I think right here I want to talk a little bit about the children on the streets and how they're living. I think this will be important, and we will see when we move further on. Currently, or in the beginning, the street kids would have fled. Basic scenario was a street kid would have fled probably an uncle's home or an auntie's home or a relative's home where they haven't been living very well, and they're probably an orphan, and they find themselves on the streets begging for survival. And they'll be begging for alms and things like that. We had a little bit of interventions from NGOs, government departments through social services, religious organizations and things like that. But even that has failed to drown out the problem because of the huge influx of street kids. And now, because there's no money, the kids are now moving into antisocial behaviors of crime, drugs, prostitution. And these are taking a real toll. You have children as young as 9, 10, 11 years old smoking glue just to numb the feeling of the cold or the abandonment or emotion, whatever it is. And they're living on the streets like that. Young girls having to deal with prostitution, teenage pregnancies, all on their own on the streets. So these are the problems that that society, because I don't want to say that street kids are facing, it's a societal problem, and this is the problems that society is facing, because you can ignore them today, but tomorrow, if you're the one that's robbed or you're the one that's raped or whatever, it's you that gets affected. So this problem affects all of us. A lot of governments, or a lot of administrations, I should say, have dangled the idea of using the Zambia National Service as a conduit to try and get these children off the streets. And personally, I think it's a brilliant idea. The first time I heard it, I just said, this is a no-brainer. This is where we have to go. This is what we need to do to sort out this problem. Why we don't go down this road, I don't know. That I'll leave to the politicians to explain why. But I would like to take a little bit of time and explain my thoughts behind this. So my thoughts are, Zambia National Service is nationwide. 10 provinces, all the districts, we've got representation of Zambia National Service. Now, we have 75,000 children aged between 0 to 18. And there's even more. I mean, if we include kids, if we include this number up to kids living, because the kids are growing and they're maturing on the streets and they're reaching 25, 30 years old. So if we were to expand this and we just said that children living on the streets, or whoever is living on the streets, and we're talking about, but look at the number 75,000. So number 75,000, my thoughts are, why don't we fully use the National Service in a model similar to how it was intended. When kids graduate from high school, they were inducted into the national service for a couple of years until they passed out. But my thinking now is, I know the national service is not meant to be a daycare center, but I think if we can use the national service system to take care of the kids, pick up these kids, and the way we would do it, I think the way it would work, because previous governments have made it voluntary for them. I think when we make it voluntary for them, we're trying to respect their human rights and give them a choice. But my view is, what kind of choice are they really living under? If they don't have any better, they don't know any better. I think sometimes it's up to us as society to take care of our own and decide that, look, let's take these kids off the streets, all of them, regardless, and put them into these camps. Or camps, I think, would be the wrong word. But take them to national service farms under the National Service Institution. Take them there and keep them there, even if it means against their own will. I know that would sound controversial right now, but I mean, the kids are living on the streets with nothing. If we keep them, even if it's against their will, but we're keeping them humanely, I feel the ends in this case do justify the means. So the idea is we take the kids, put them into national service camps, and we design programs that will benefit the national service, the nation, and the children all at the same time. So we'll have agricultural program, we'll have technical programs, all these engineering, bricklaying, carpentry, plumbing, all these technical programs, which the national service will be able to use in order to complete their mission in providing assistance to the government of the Republic. But apart from that, the second level of this is that the national service will be removing these kids off the streets, taking care of them, and pushing them to a level, because they're not just learning these skills, they're also learning life skills, how to take care of a home, how to take care of themselves. And in learning these life skills, they're building a certain level of self-respect. And that's the most important aspect of this, is building that level of self-respect. And once the children have a level of self-respect with the layer of discipline that comes in with the military type structure that we have in the national service, I think we're able to grow these kids into productive young adults who are able to assimilate back into society and be productive members of society. But the kids will be doing this. The benefit now to the nation is production in the national service would grow. And so with the growth in production in the national service and the funds through the farms and the skills that they've earned, the program, apart from the funding that national service naturally gets, but the program should in turn, even in a period of maybe 5 to 10 years, should in turn start to generate funds to be able to absorb these children into into the system and then graduate them back out into society. And once we're graduating them back out and they become productive into society, we get them back into the communities. And now once they're back into the communities, they become the first generation trying to stop kids coming from the community and moving on to the street. So eventually, what should happen is that we have a reduced number of kids coming from the communities and onto the streets, and then we have an increase in a reduced number of kids coming from the streets into society, from homes into the streets. That would reduce the number going into the national service, which would also increase the number coming out of the national service. So we have more people who are integrated properly back into society, going back into the community and being able to take care of those that are less, because we've raised a responsible child who should be able to see the difficulties that he or she has gone through and recognize those things within the society and be able to interject before it becomes a problem and enters back into our streets. So I feel that we need to use unconventional methods, because this is an unconventional problem. So we need to use unconventional methods to address this unconventional problem. And we have to, I know using the word force and out of their control and things like that sounds bad, but it's for the greater good. And the thing we have to take away here is for the greater good, not just for the kids, but for the country as a whole. And this could be used to promote a whole load of other services in the society. So I think, in conclusion, or just wind up the discussion, I think I can say my opinion is that it's not an effort that we can just leave to government, but it's an effort that we all have to take part in, participate in, and ensure that we support government's effort to take these children off the streets and ensure that they stay in these programs. And the only way they're going to stay in the program if the streets are made unbearable for them to live in. So you make life harder for them on the streets. And that doesn't mean that you have to be inhumane or anything, but we stop giving arms, stop giving them any incentive for them to want to go back, so that they are more motivated to stay in the program rather than run away from the program. Because subsequent governments have tried this policy, and once they graduate out of the program, they go back to the streets, but they have no support system behind that to keep them off the street. So you have children you spent money building up on, giving them skills, put them back into society, but there's no societal support to keep them off the streets. And I think that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. I've been your host, Mutepa. And before we wind up, I would like to say a special thanks to our hosts here at Zambia Lodge for giving us an opportunity and the space to record this episode. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.